Happy Friday. Today is Friday, October the 21st, 2022. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 65, Joel 2, 1 through 11, 2 Timothy 3, 10 through 15, or you could have read Psalm 84, 1 through 7, Jeremiah 9, 17 through 26, and 2 Timothy 3, 10 through 15 once again. I'm going to look at Jeremiah and talk about circumcision, everybody's favorite subject. But to get to the point, we see it a lot in the Old Testament. Old Testament talks about it all the time. But that's because it's a major sign of the covenant that God makes with the Hebrew people, specifically through Abraham. That's the sign of the covenant. That's the outstanding sign of the covenant in the Old Testament. It even follows into the New Testament where it becomes, a major issue for the early church. Think about Paul arguing with other believers about the necessity of circumcision in a post-resurrection world, right? Especially as it applies to people who are from outside the Jewish faith, people who were not born into the Hebrew faith, Hebrew people, descendants of Abraham, who their culture did not practice that. Matter of fact, in the Greek world, it was frowned upon for all kinds of reasons, presumably. But, in the early church, there was this question like, well, it basically was the tension is like, are we just a subset of Judaism? Or is this something new? And Paul was arguing, well, this is something entirely new. And to require this of these people who are finding salvation in Christ is, doesn't make no sense, so to speak. So, but, if you want to know more about that, you can read Galatians if you want a quick primer on his arguments. And then even going on, like, you have Paul talking about, like, yeah, okay, circumcision, yeah, but, you should circumcise your heart. That's the argument he makes in Romans, like, chapter 2, is this idea that, it's not just about the sign. You should act. There's other stuff, right? That's what you should be focusing on. That is bringing our heart and inward life in line with God's will, rather than focus just on outward appearances and symbols and signs. Of course, he's not coming up with this language on his own. He's borrowing this from places like Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy 10 is where we hear this language, circumcise your hearts. That's because if all that God wanted was, circumcision, there were lots of nations who practiced it. Yeah, there were a lot of nations that didn't practice it in the ancient world and frowned upon it. But in the ancient Near East, there were actually quite a few nations that practiced it in some form or another, to some extent or another. And Jeremiah, in this passage, at the end of this passage, beginning in verse 25 is really where I'm focusing, actually lists those nations. He says, like, there's all these pagan nations, rather, who practice circumcision. And then with Judah just kind of thrown in amongst them, like they're just another one of the just another nation. They have the mark in the flesh, sure, but are they God's people? They have that mark in the flesh, but they might as well not have it at all, because they don't act like it, right? They don't live out the covenant that they made with God. They might as well not have that at all, because their hearts are still a mess. So anyway, circumcision. That's the DBR for today. Get out, enjoy the day, enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you Monday. Talk to you later.